Okay, blockchain is taking over the world. We're going to use blockchain for everything and put people out of work, right? No, just kidding. I don't want to take too much time on defining what blockchain is, but I'm going to start with you, Raul, for a quick definition of what blockchain is and why we're talking about it.
Okay, I'll start it off. I think...
and please introduce yourself.
Yeah, okay. My name's Rahul Sanad, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Tesloop, where we run a Tesla-based mobility, car sharing, and a connected car network for Tesla owners. So yeah, blockchain, I think, is a technology that effectively lets you do a couple interesting things. One is it enables a truly digital currency for the first time. And secondly, it lets you create decentralized applications that don't rely on any specific trusted party to run them. So I think those are the main features. And I think due to the valuation of Bitcoin and Ethereum, everybody got interested over the last few years, and we'll see how things go over the next year.
And Richard, if you could introduce yourself and comment on what are the advantages or disadvantages of a decentralized ledger versus the kind of centralized approach that I think most people use today.
Chris?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Well, Richard.
Yeah, I'm Rick Grunhagen. Actually, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Spirion. We're a connected vehicle company. We've got close to 4 million vehicles on our platform today. And we have businesses in the automotive and commercial sectors.
Can you hear Rick? Can't hear Rick.
All right, is that better?
Yeah, I think you're good now.
Okay, I'll hold the mic right here. So the advantage is that you don't need to have a middleman to negotiate a transaction. In our case, as an example, we build solutions for dealers, and we help dealers to manage their inventory. We give them analytics on how their dealerships are performing at an enterprise level. So, for example, Group 1 Automotive uses our solution across many of the dealers in their group. And dealers today really want a solution that works across manufacturers. And they also want new revenue streams. And one of the things that they could do is monetize their used car vehicle inventory. And this is something that we demoed at CES in January, but we used blockchain for that solution to handle the transfer of custody of the vehicle, as also the negotiation of the insurance contract for the vehicle.
But what are the challenges for a dealer to deploy blockchain, even though I think the use cases are pretty good?
Yeah, the challenges really are that everyone in the value chain has to participate. So the insurance company has to participate in that case. Obviously, we have to be integrated, and anyone else who's handling the payments for the vehicle has to be integrated as well.
But for a dealer to do something like that today, they'd have to do it with an aftermarket device of some kind, or how would that work?
Yes, to provide the solution that we provide, they have to use an aftermarket device because that's the only solution that would work across make, model, manufacturer.
Chris, what are the advantages of decentralized versus centralized? Because in most respects, centralized seems to be working okay.
Centralized works fine as long as you can trust the person in the middle who's doing the trust service or the escrow service or the transaction processing service. Now, most of the things that we do today in exchanging value involve a number of those services. And they're extremely valuable. They're also fairly expensive. So the potential of blockchain is by doing it in a decentralized way, you have the potential to eventually perhaps do it cheaper, but more importantly, do it in a way that can be trusted by all parties. Now, I'll just give you an example. I was in finance at Toyota. We spent a lot of time running our own accounting system. We spent millions of dollars hiring an outside accounting firm to come and audit our financial system. Right? If we can reconcile our financial system by having a common financial system with our partner so that both systems reconcile automatically, you can eliminate all of that, or a lot of that reconciliation. And that's probably true of most of the transactions that we're involved in.
So are we talking about cost savings or just a higher level of confidence in the information?
Both. Both.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, every siloed accounting system or every siloed ledger, right, would have differences because of errors of entry, mistakes, perhaps outright fraud. Right. If you can eliminate those, because when the transactions are put on a ledger, they're automatically reconciled, they're done through a consensus, you could start from a position where you have the proverbial one source of truth.
And I meant to ask you to introduce yourself and your organization, which I think is important for people to understand. 150 members of Mobi?
Yeah. So I'm CEO and founder of an organization called Mobi, which is a nonprofit consortium. It grew out of a group of automakers who were running POCs with blockchain in mobility. And just going back to something Richard said it works when everybody participates. And that's what most of the OEMs found. They were all doing the same POCs, and they were all going nowhere. And the reason was the hard problem is not putting something on a blockchain. The hard problem is getting to scale, is getting everybody together to participate so that you can have that trusted ecosystem.
And for members of your organization, what is the quickest path to adoption? Is it a single organization choosing to use blockchain for a particular application?
So we're trying to develop application layer standards. By that I mean common ways for cars to use blockchains to talk to infrastructure, to other cars, common ways for cars to identify themselves in secure ways, right? Common ways to put things on a blockchain so that they can be trusted, so it can serve as a trusted database. So what is the quickest way to get there in terms of applications? You have to look at applications that the technology can do today. There's a huge amount of hype in this space. There's an awful lot of applications that make no sense today because the latency is too great, the throughput is too low, and the costs are too high. That will change by orders of magnitude in the future, I'm pretty confident. But what you can do today probably are things around supply chain, perhaps software updates, provenance of software updates, things like that. Those are things that you don't need low latency or high throughput for.
Now, Nagmana, there's no question you're working with a lot of automobile companies, perhaps nearly all the automobile companies in the market. Where do your conversations stand in terms of evaluating blockchain, implementing blockchain, or having proofs of concept in the automotive industry?
Yeah. So, let me just introduce myself. I work for IBM, and I've been focused in the automotive sector for a long time. I'm the CTO for automotive and aerospace and defense industries. And I've been working on blockchain for the last 2 years, AI and blockchain. And it has been a journey for, I think just as it has been a journey for our clients, it has been a journey for us also. So what I see is, a lot of hype with blockchain. People want to apply blockchain to everything, and that's where we have to make some conscious decisions and say, is this a good use case for blockchain? First of all, is there need for trust? That's the first thing. Do you even have a business network? Is there a need for compliance? So those are some of the critical things. And the other thing that I see that becomes an obstacle for going into production, other than technology constraints, what's the business model, right? In the end, if you can do the same thing in a more expensive way, does that really make sense? So is there a clear business value and a business model, especially in the domain of new business models and new revenue opportunities, and how OEMs can actually partner with, kind of have a business ecosystem more around the mobility and the connected space, is where I see we can really kind of see some true value. Supply chain, we do a lot of work in supply chain. Perfect case, right? Parts provenance, logistics, perfect, but that's cost cutting, right? That's cost cutting. So I think we have to look at it, and this is my point of view. When we look at automotive, can we provide a real business model and new revenue opportunity ecosystem model using not just the DLT, but also the smart contract functionality for blockchain that can become a compelling case for OEMs to go ahead with that?
Now, in your role at IBM, are you obliged to be something of an evangelist for blockchain?
No. Hardly that. So, I work at the intersection of technology, industry, and business. And blockchain is just one of the things that I've been working on. I've done a lot of work in AI. And my thing is, technology for the sake of technology does nothing for anyone, right? So how can we use this in a way where it can provide some real business value?
So let me ask you this. What is the nature of that conversation you have with an OEM where you say, you know what would be a good solution for this problem that you have? Blockchain.
Yeah. So again, is there need for trust, first of all? Do you have a business network, right? We have seen organizations just trying to do it within divisional. For OEMs, finance is a good area to start with, supply chain and finance. And the important thing is, test it out. Try it out for yourself. See how it works. The technology, scalability, performance, the technology is evolving as any new technology does. But what I advise is, start small. Start with something that will give you a quick return of value. Finance is a great case there. And then you can build your own expertise and build your own center of competence and capabilities, and then expand it to the enterprise.
Now, Chris, I want to ask you, because you mentioned throughput, and I understand throughput can be a bit of a challenge with blockchain.
The two big public blockchains are Bitcoin and Ethereum. And the throughput is in the order of single digits or maybe low double digits, which is a long way from the number of transactions going through per second on the Visa network. So when people talk about micropayments, right, that's probably out there in the future somewhere. However, for supply chain, just keeping track, that's probably enough.
So focus on lower throughput applications at the outset?
If you're trying to come up with an application that makes sense today, those low throughput, perhaps high latency applications are probably the right ones to look at, particularly where there's lots of players involved in an ecosystem with lots of paper, cross-border transactions, and one reason why supply chain is such a good one, again, goes back to this question of how do you get everybody involved. And supply chain, you have the big OEM at the top who can force the adoption of standards all the way down through the chain, and they also, being at the top, tend to reap the benefit of cost reductions in the chain that they can pass on to their customers through a more competitive product. So that's a great one.
Well, and I'm thinking in the industry we have challenges with finding cars that have recalls on them and finding out which suppliers were implicated, et cetera, et cetera.
So there's a great one there around the provenance of parts in the supply chain. When there's a problem, you don't want to recall a half year's production of Camrys. You want to recall the 100 Camrys that might have a bad batch of screws. And if you track correctly, immutably, the product through the supply chain, you might have a chance of doing that. And that's another reason why, for example, Walmart and others have had some success in doing supply chain with organic produce. It's a problem when you need to do a recall, as is in the news this week.
And Rick, that seems to me to have significant implications for the fleet industry, which I think is taking a very close look at blockchain. Certainly, Experian's very active in that space. Yes. What is the fleet industry looking at to get from blockchain, or how to leverage blockchain?
Well, I think in the same way that it's very applicable to supply chain, it's also applicable to chain of custody. So just the shipment of goods and all of the transfers that happen from the time they leave the manufacturing plant overseas to putting on the ship to coming into the port, going across borders, and those types of things. So one example is for food goods that have to be maintained at a certain temperature and humidity. You want to know that has happened across the entire supply chain. As they left the farm and then go to the table. And blockchain is a good way to actually have a verified log of what the temperature and humidity were at any point in shipment.
So Raul, you're actually using blockchain today, but with some caveats, it seems. Can you describe how you're putting it to work?
So we're using it for a very small utility, which is to hash the car data, meaning you take like a snapshot of it and you store it in the blockchain so that if in the future anybody thinks maybe you changed the data, it can prove you didn't. So I think that's like the smallest use possible of the blockchain. And it's moderately, like it's a little bit valuable, but it's very cheap.
But you said you were doing that to sort of set the stage for a broader deployment.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you go out 10 years and if blockchain is the same price and it's as easy to develop on as, .NET or Linux or whatever, then, databases, SQL Server, then it's interesting. Like my contention is almost everything people want to do in kind of the corporate setting on blockchain, you can do the beginning of it without blockchain. And the beginning of it is about standards. You've got to set those. It's about access. How do you give that to people? There's huge privacy concerns in automotive, especially if you're talking about personal mobility, that I think the blockchain hurts you with. It doesn't help you with. So that if you do blockchain, you got to then start encrypting everything within the blockchain, and it's just a complete layer of unnecessary overhead. I think if blockchain is as fast and as cheap and as easy to develop on, then sure, why not? But I think we're not like quite 2x or 3x. We're like 10x or 100x or 1,000x in terms of cost and kind of the overhead today. So like my feeling, like we run on what I call like the mock chain, which is it's the ideas of the blockchain of be open source and have standards and let people access things and share data, but it's not running on a blockchain architecture because the fact I like to use is a year's worth of car data, 3 gigs on Amazon is 15 cents to store, like the telemetry, and that's $54,000 on Ethereum to store. So clearly nobody wants to pay that much, and even if Vitalik says in 2 years it'll be 1,000 times cheaper, but that still means it's 1,000 times more expensive, which maybe you want to pay, but most people won't. So, I mean, I think we're a ways off before what you really care about is trustlessness. Can you, like the reason for me to use a blockchain is if you want to create something, throw it out there and nobody owns it or controls it, I don't think there's any other way. Like that's what the blockchain does. And clearly, if you have something that GM and 6 suppliers and Uber and Lyft and Tesla and everybody else is all using, they don't want anybody to control that because then you're vulnerable to whoever does control it. So in the future, having something trustlessness that mediates whatever, whether it's car rentals or supply chain or this or that is great. But I think in the beginning, you kind of got to trust somebody to get it running and use it and the developers to keep it going. So as long as you're going to trust somebody, the blockchain to me doesn't buy you that much, and you can be like 3 times as fast without it. So we're very bullish on the like long-term potential, but much less so in the medium, and very, I would say, on the short term, don't see, other than like proof of concept, I get money, my boss likes me, those types of things, those are good reasons. But like for real pragmatics, we don't see in the next year or two great use cases.
So the 2 usage scenarios that I'm hearing is one is supply chain, but the one that we haven't really talked a lot about is mobility. And Nagmana, you were talking about how blockchain is an enabler of different business models and use cases. Can you flesh out that idea a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, so we have actually done some work in this space. We did a pilot called Car E-Wallet with a partnership with ZF, Tier 1 supplier, and UBS. And what that did was it converted your car into a blockchain-enabled e-wallet that would automatically pay for transactions that your car would make around, tolls, parking. And the vision is not just for the cars that we have right now. So the vision is around autonomous cars, right? As you are sitting in your office and the car is running errands for you, right? And maybe it's being used by someone else. And how can we enable that kind of mobility and car sharing and new business models? Because now your car becomes a platform where all the different providers can offer their services and they can be used automatically by the car, but in a manner that's very trustable and very transparent. So that is work that we have done. So great potential there, but I think it's the scalability and the performance that needs to catch up to have that low latency and kind of speed that is needed for connected vehicles. The other thing that I am really passionate about, and we have done some work, is around this, using blockchain for the software-defined vehicle concept and then tying it to the software over-the-air updates, right? So, the cars are going to turn into, like you have your cell phones, right? So you can update your car because everything is moving to software. So you can update new features to your car like you update your phone. So right now, the OEM is the bottleneck and all the testing and everything. So how about, is there something that can enable us to make it more of an open ecosystem where, different suppliers can provide their services in a more trusted fashion and more dynamic, using not just the blockchain DLT, but also blockchain smart contract functionality, which I feel has great potential and it gets overlooked a little bit. So smart contract is, just for anyone who doesn't know, right now, we have these business contracts between business partners. Smart contract is a component of blockchain that encompasses that business contract in the code as part of the consensus mechanism and blockchain technology. So anytime you have a violation of that contract, it automatically kicks it off. For instance, yeah.
I was going to say, Raul's champing at the bit to add 2 cents here.
Yeah, well, just to play devil's advocate on that, I would say you can create a car wallet, you can pay tolls, you can do automatic transfers of money. You don't need the blockchain for that. All of that can be implemented in a centralized manner, and it can be implemented much more quickly. And I would argue in a much more robust manner, you can implement the same logic you would in a smart contract in business logic in your database.
So now, what about the idea of blockchain enabling different business models with cars?
So I think that is true for something like Augur, which is a predictive marketplace and reputations and such. But if you look at kind of the practical stuff in the car space, I don't see a business model that it enables that you can't do it without it. What it does enable is again, a trustless, nobody owns it situation. But I don't think anybody's businesses have been trusting each other's for thousands of years. I don't think that's not the fundamental problem with mobility now, that I can't trust GM or I can't trust them. If they say they're going to do it, if they sign their name to a contract, I can probably trust it a lot. Maybe not 100%, but 99 something percent. I trust IBM. If IBM's going to run a system for me and say it's all going to work, that's good enough.
A mediating perspective from Chris on this.
So I wanted to pick up a little bit on smart contracts. So when people talk about blockchain, they often talk about a suite of technologies, some of which are blockchains, but some of which are associated with the blockchain community. And smart contracts is one of those. Smart contracts actually were introduced in a paper in 96, long before anybody came up with a digital currency or a blockchain, long before Satoshi Nakamoto and Bitcoin. And the original use case in that paper, and it was a paper by a guy named Nick Sosbo, the original use case was the automatic transfer of an auto title when a lease wasn't paid. So the smart contract was built into the car, the lease wasn't paid, right? The currency wasn't paid, and the car ownership reverted and the owner or the lessor lost access to it.
I will submit we have a real problem in terms of not so much transferring ownership of a vehicle, although sometimes that is an issue, but also transferring ownership of the telematics subscription to the vehicle. So you could get a car and someone didn't cancel that agreement, and all of a sudden you have all their personal information.
This is becoming a huge problem with the number of connected devices, right? We have 20 billion connected devices today. Increasingly, they have embedded intelligence, and increasingly, those devices are going to be transacting directly with other devices. So blockchain can bring a lot to the table, right? One is machine or vehicle identities, right? How does another machine know that it's dealing with a trusted counterparty? This is where trust matters, right? Think about the internet. There's a real problem with trust there. When I get the email from the Nigerian prince, well, it's possible it's a Nigerian prince and he really does want to pay me $1 million for doing a simple cross-border transfer. But it's also possible, right, it's somebody who wants to steal my bank account information, right? As humans, we're pretty good at distinguishing between the two because we learn, right? In a machine-to-machine economy, right, so there's 20 billion devices today. That number's doubling every 3 years. So it's not going to take us long before we get to 100 billion and close to 1 trillion connected devices. And how will all of those machines, right, know the Nigerian prince from the scammer?
Seems
right?
like it's the T word, it's trust.
It gets down to trust, and
Okay.
it becomes a much bigger problem in the Internet of Things.
I have one more question for each of you to answer, and I do want to tell you all here that Raul, Chris, Nagmana, Rick are all excellent experts to speak to after the panel if you have further questions about this topic, which I'm sure is going to continue to fascinate and confuse people for quite some time. But my final question is, if I'm an automaker or a supplier in the industry, and you have 150 of these organizations as part of Moby today, starting with you, Rick, and then going down the panel, what is your advice to an automaker today or a supplier to the automotive industry vis-a-vis blockchain? Ignore it, embrace it, try it? What do I do?
I think it's important, if it's to work, that everybody embrace it. As was being said earlier, everybody has to be a participant in that blockchain. I think OEMs will be interested in what the value is in it for them. There are things like warranty information and vehicle service records that they can obtain through that to build better vehicles in the future. So.
Nagmana?
Yeah, so I would definitely not tell anyone to sit on the sidelines, but I would also recommend that people take a little bit of a back step and think about it, right? Think about the business model and start with a case that will give you immediate business value, and then target the cases. We talked earlier that everyone trusts GM or whatever, right? We are moving to a world that is gonna be a lot trustless, and we have to be ready for that. So, be ready for that, how you can face that, but, start with something that will give you immediate return on value around supply chain and finance.
Chris?
So join Moby. It's a great way to get a seat at the table, get your knowledge base up to speed, participate relatively cheaper than doing your own R&D and use cases. And while you're at it, you can help make the world maybe a little bit better by developing mobility that's safer, greener, and more affordable.
I like that fundamental message, by the way, of setting standards for OEMs to share information. That would be an extraordinary breakthrough in and of itself. Raul, you get the last word here.
I'd second that. I think it's all about open standards. Whether it's blockchain or not, I think open standards are going to unlock a ton of value. And then I think take open source for a test drive. If you can't swallow that, you're probably not going to eat the whole blockchain. So I think open standards, open source code is the right place to start.
Okay. Please thank these experts for their opinions.